The landscape of a German military airfield in the latter stages of World War II was a meticulously ordered universe of angular camouflage, swastika-bedecked tails, and the sleek, often sinister profiles of Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Junkers Ju 88s. It was a world built on a specific design philosophy, a testament to German engineering principles, efficient, lethal, and in many ways, elegant. So, the arrival of the captured B-24 Liberator was nothing short of an alien visitation. Its appearance on the tarmac was a profound anomaly, a jarring disruption of the Luftwaffe's visual and ideological harmony. This was not a scheduled delivery. It was an uninvited guest whose very presence whispered secrets of a distant, industrial power that operated on an entirely different scale. The aircraft itself was a colossus, a study in stark contrasts. Where German aircraft often exhibited a certain streamlined grace, the B-24 was all formidable, unapologetic function. Its high-mounted, immense Davis wing, spanning over 110 feet, seemed to dwarf the structures around it. Its slab-sided fuselage, punctuated by a dozen gun positions, looked less like an aeronautical design and more like a factory floor that had been somehow convinced to fly. To the German ground crews and pilots who gathered to stare, it was an object of simultaneous curiosity, professional disdain, and a lurking, unspoken dread. It was not just a captured plane. It was a physical manifesto of American industrial might, a tangible piece of a war economy that was now parked, audaciously, in the heart of the enemy's domain. The journey of this specific B-24, often given the German designation, for such number 1+01, test number 1+01, or a simple, stark black cross painted over its American star, was a story in itself. It was not shot down in a dramatic dogfight. More often, these prized intelligence assets were captured largely intact on abandoned airfields, particularly in the disarray following the Allied advances in North Africa or later in the Balkans. A landing gear failure, a lack of fuel, or a hasty retreat by its crew could leave a perfectly flyable aircraft as a spoil of war. The German Special Operations Unit known as Kampfgeschwader 200, KG-200, was specifically tasked with the recovery and exploitation of such Allied aircraft. Their experts would descend upon a captured bomber, carefully assessing its damage, performing makeshift repairs, and then undertaking the perilous task of flying it back to the Reich, navigating through both Allied and German air defenses who would see only the silhouette of an enemy bomber. The arrival of such a machine at a central evaluation center like Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary test and research facility, was an event. It was a direct violation of the front lines, a reverse intelligence coup. The very fact that it sat there, being refueled by German trucks, its engines being inspected by German mechanics, was a psychological victory in a small, symbolic war. For the engineers and test pilots of the Erprobungsstellen test centers, this was a unique opportunity. Intelligence reports and gun camera footage were one thing. They provided data. But this was the real thing. They could touch the aluminum skin, feel the thickness of the plexiglass, sit in the pilot's seat, and trace the wiring with their own hands. This was a chance to dissect the enemy's mind, to understand not just the specifications on a page, but the philosophy behind the machine. The initial, external walk-around was always a moment of quiet revelation. The Germans were masters of precision engineering, often optimizing their designs for performance with limited resources. Their inspection of the B-24 revealed a different paradigm altogether. The rivets were not always perfectly aligned. The surface finish was sometimes rough. There was a sheer, brute force robustness to its construction that was both alien and impressive. It was not crafted like a watch. It was built like a locomotive. The defensive armament, the .50 caliber Browning machine guns protruding from turrets, waist windows, and tail position, spoke of a design expecting and prepared for a brutal, sustained fight. The bomb bay, vast and engineered for a colossal payload, was a silent statement of strategic purpose. It was designed not for a surgical strike, but for the systematic demolition of an enemy's industrial heart. This uninvited guest, therefore, represented a multitude of challenges and questions. It was a tactical puzzle, how to defeat it in the air. It was an engineering conundrum, What could be learned from its design principles? And, most profoundly, it was a strategic shock. The presence of the B-24 on the tarmac was a silent, gleaming sermon on the topic of American production capacity. Every rivet, every square foot of aluminum, every redundant system was a testament to a nation that could build such complex machines not by the dozens, but by the thousands. Over 18,000 would be built before the war's end. The German pilots and engineers, standing before this immense machine, were not just looking at an aircraft. They were looking at the future of aerial warfare, and it was a future built on a scale they were beginning to realize they could never hope to match. The guest had arrived, and it was about to deliver a very uncomfortable message. To understand the profound impact the captured B-24 had on the German military mind, one must first appreciate the aircraft's monumental role in the Allied war effort. It was not merely a bomber. It was a strategic instrument, a logistical marvel, and the very embodiment of the arsenal of democracy. While the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress captured the public's imagination with its rugged, iconic profile and heroic narratives, it was the consolidated B-24 Liberator that shouldered the heavier burden, becoming the most produced American bomber, and indeed heavy aircraft, in history. Its significance lay not in romanticism, but in relentless, globe-spanning utility. The Liberator was born from a pre-war requirement for a bomber that would surpass the B-17 in every key performance metric: range, speed, and bomb load. Consolidated Aircraft's chief designer, Isaac M. Ike Ladon, responded with a revolutionary design. The most distinctive feature was the high aspect ratio Davis wing. This long, narrow wing was not an aesthetic choice. It was a stroke of aerodynamic genius. It provided exceptional lift, which was crucial for the aircraft's heavy payloads and high-altitude performance, and its design contributed to a higher top speed than the B-17. However, this engineering choice came with trade-offs. The wing's construction was complex, and its high-mounted position necessitated a unique fuselage design. This resulted in the B-24's slab-sided, almost rectangular cross-section, which, while structurally efficient and offering vast internal volume, lacked the graceful curves of its Boeing counterpart. From its inception, the B-24 was a machine of pure function, a characteristic that would define its service. This functional design translated directly into strategic capability. The Liberator's long range made it the only bomber capable of covering the vast, unforgiving expanses of the Pacific Ocean, the North Atlantic, and the Mediterranean. It was the B-24, operating from bases in North Africa, that famously struck the heart of the Romanian oil fields at Ploiești in the low-level, high-risk Operation Tidal Wave. While the raid came at a devastating cost, it underscored the aircraft's role in striking at the Third Reich's most critical strategic weak point: its fuel supply. In the Pacific, Liberators flew missions of staggering distance, isolating Japanese-held islands and pummeling strategic targets across a theater where range was paramount. Beyond its strategic bombing role, the B-24's voluminous fuselage and long endurance made it phenomenally versatile. It was adapted into the C-87 Liberator Express, a vital cargo and personnel transport that ferried supplies over the hump of the Himalayas from India to China, keeping the nationalist Chinese forces in the fight. It served as a maritime patrol aircraft, the PB-4Y, one for the U.S. Navy, and the PB-4Y, two privateer, hunting, and destroying German U-boats that threatened the transatlantic supply lifelines. Equipped with radar and lee lights, it became the scourge of the nighttime surface raider and submarine. It was also the platform for electronic warfare and reconnaissance. There was virtually no aspect of the Allied air war in which the Liberator did not play a critical, if often unsung, part. This ubiquity was made possible by an unprecedented feat of mass production. The B-24 was not just built in one factory. It was built in a coordinated network of plants, most famously Ford's colossal Willow Run facility in Michigan. Henry Ford applied his automotive assembly line principles to this giant warplane, promising, and eventually delivering, a Liberator an hour. At its peak, Willow Run was churning out a complete B-24 every 63 minutes. This was industrial warfare on a scale never before witnessed. While German aircraft manufacturers were crafting machines with a level of hand-fitting and precision that limited their production rates, American industry was stamping out Liberators by the tens of thousands. With a final production tally of over 18,000 airframes, the B-24 became a symbol of quantitative superiority that quality, on its own, could not overcome. Therefore, when a German evaluation team walked up to a captured B-24, they were not just examining an individual aircraft. They were confronting a system. They saw an airframe designed for maximum strategic effect, long legs, and a heavy punch. They saw a design philosophy that prioritized rugged serviceability and adaptability over finesse. And whether they were consciously aware of it or not, they were looking at a product of the Willow Run assembly line, a tangible piece of evidence that the same nation that built this complex, four-engine heavy bomber could do so with the same relentless efficiency as it built family automobiles. The B-24 mattered because it was the workhorse that carried the weight of a global war on its wings. Its capture offered the Luftwaffe a fleeting, terrifying glimpse into the engine of that war production, an engine that was running at full throttle and showed no signs of stopping. As the Third Reich crumbled, collapsing in on itself under the relentless pressure from east and west, a new, secret war began. This conflict was not fought for territory or ideological supremacy, but for knowledge. While infantry divisions secured towns and bridges, specialized teams of intelligence officers, engineers, and scientists fanned out across the shattered German landscape. Their mission: to unearth the secrets of the Reich's advanced technology before they could be destroyed, lost, or fall into the hands of the advancing Soviet Union. This high-stakes race was known as Operation LUSTY, an acronym for Luftwaffe's secret technology. The man at the helm of the air intelligence aspect of this operation was a figure straight out of a pulp adventure novel, Colonel Harold E. Watson. A former test pilot and a man of immense drive and technical curiosity, Watson's Whizzers, as his team became known, were the spearhead of the American effort to capture and exploit German aeronautical secrets. Their mandate was breathtakingly broad: find every advanced aircraft, engine, weapon, and blueprint they could, and get them back to the United States for evaluation. They were, in effect, tasked with looting the intellectual vaults of the Luftwaffe. The challenges they faced were monumental. They operated in a chaotic, war-torn environment where front lines were fluid and danger was constant. They raced against time, as retreating German forces had orders to destroy anything of value to prevent its capture, the Nero Decree in its practical application. Scuttled aircraft, burned documents, and sabotage prototypes littered airfields and research facilities. They also raced against their new allies, the Soviets, in a tense, unspoken competition that prefigured the Cold War. A jet engine or a swept-wing design secured in April 1945 could provide an incalculable advantage in the years to come. The hunt was a process of detective work, persuasion, and opportunism. Watson's teams worked from target lists compiled from pre-war intelligence, aerial reconnaissance photos, and, most crucially, information gleaned from captured German scientists and engineers who were often eager to cooperate in exchange for favorable treatment. They would descend upon hidden forest factories, underground tunnels, and bomb-damaged research centers like the legendary Luftwaffeforschungsanstalt, Aeronautical Research Institute, at Vulcanroad and the test center at Rechlin. What they found was a treasure trove of futuristic technology that seemed to leap from the pages of science fiction. The prizes were staggering. They uncovered and secured the world's first operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me-262, in large numbers. They found the rocket-powered, vertical takeoff Bachem-Ba 349 Natter and the mammoth, six-engine Blohm and Voss BV-238 flying boat. They collected advanced piston-engine fighters like the Dornier Du 335 File, with its unique push-pull configuration. But beyond the complete airframes, they sought the knowledge. They gathered thousands of technical documents, wind tunnel data, and research reports on topics ranging from swept-wing aerodynamics to guided missiles. They were not just collecting machines. They were harvesting the accumulated intellectual capital of a generation of brilliant, if morally compromised, German engineers. The capture of a flyable B-24 Liberator fell perfectly within the scope of LUSTY, though from a different angle. While the primary focus was on German technology, the operation also encompassed the evaluation of how the Luftwaffe had tested and assessed Allied technology. A captured and tested B-24 was an intelligence goldmine in reverse. It provided the Americans with profound insights into their own equipment, seen through the critical lens of the enemy. How had German pilots evaluated the Liberator's handling? What were its perceived weaknesses and strengths? What tactical countermeasures had they developed based on their flights in it? By securing these German evaluation reports and the aircraft they tested, Operation Lusty allowed the U.S. Army Air Forces to conduct a meta-analysis of their own war machine. The final, most dramatic phase of the operation was the physical retrieval of these treasures. Under Watson's command, a cadre of German pilots, who had been encouraged to cooperate, worked alongside American ferry pilots to make the captured aircraft airworthy. In an incredible aerial armada, this mixed fleet of advanced German jets and propeller-driven aircraft, along with the captured Allied planes like the B-24, were flown from Europe to the coast, then shipped across the Atlantic to the United States. The sight of Me-262s and other German warbirds bearing U.S. stars was a visual testament to the operation's success. Operation Lusty was, therefore, one of the most consequential intelligence and technology transfer operations in history. It was not an act of mere plunder. It was a strategic investment that would pay dividends for decades. The data and hardware collected directly accelerated American aviation technology, shaving years off the development of supersonic aircraft, jet engines, and missile systems. It provided the foundational knowledge for the Century Series fighters and the space race. And in the specific context of the captured B-24, it provided a unique and invaluable window into the mind of the enemy, revealing not only what they thought of Allied technology, but also, by comparison, the profound strengths and unexpected weaknesses of their own. The hunt for enemy technology was, in the end, a race to secure the future, and Operation Lusty won it. The story of how a specific, pristine B-24 Liberator fell into German hands is a tale not of aerial combat, but of the fog of war, logistical overreach, and sheer, dumb luck. Unlike the dramatic narratives of a bomber limping back to a crash landing or being forced down by flak, the capture of this particular aircraft, which would come to be known unofficially among its German handlers, was an almost administrative event, one that delivered a priceless intelligence asset to the Luftwaffe with minimal effort. Its journey from a use-off workhorse to a Zielobjekt, target object, for evaluation began not in the skies over Germany, but on a dusty, remote airfield in the Balkans. The backdrop was Operation Tidal Wave, the ambitious and costly low-level raid on the Ploiești oil refineries in Romania on August 1, 1943. While the mission itself is legendary for its bravery and carnage, its aftermath created a ripple effect of disarray. Damaged B-24s, separated from their formations and struggling with failing engines and wounded crews, sought any haven they could find. Many attempted to reach neutral Turkey, hoping for internment rather than capture. It was in this chaotic context that a B-24, part of the 98th Bomb Group, the Pyramiders, found itself critically low on fuel and with navigational uncertainties. The exact aircraft, its serial number now lost to specific history, but representative of several such cases, made a fateful decision to put down on what they believed was a Turkish airfield. The landing was successful, a testament to the skill of a pilot landing a heavy, wounded bomber on an unfamiliar strip. But the relief of the crew was short-lived. They had not landed in neutral Turkey. They were on an Axis-aligned airfield, likely in Bulgaria or a German-held sector of Yugoslavia. The crew was immediately taken as prisoners of war, beginning a long and arduous captivity. Their aircraft, however, was now a prize of war. It had fallen into enemy hands almost completely intact, a rare and valuable occurrence. Most captured Allied aircraft were wrecks, scavenged for parts, or studied as forensic evidence of their resilience. This Liberator was different. It was a flying laboratory, a complete system waiting to be reverse-engineered and flown. The news of this capture would have traveled quickly up the German chain of command to the attention of Kampfgeschwader 200, KG-200, the Luftwaffe's Special Operations Wing whose purview included flying captured Allied aircraft for clandestine missions and evaluation. KG-200 was the Luftwaffe's equivalent of Watson's Whizzers in reverse, a unit of experts and daredevil pilots who specialized in the quirks and handling of enemy aircraft. A team was dispatched to secure the bomber. Their first task was assessment. They would have conducted a meticulous inspection, checking for battle damage, the state of the four Pratt & Whitney R-1830 twin Wasp engines, the integrity of the airframe, and the functionality of its systems. Finding it largely sound, the next step was to make it German. The transformation was both practical and psychological. The American insignia, the white star on a blue circle, were painted over with the stark black Bockenkreuz of the Luftwaffe. Swastikas were likely applied to the tail fin, a bizarre and jarring sight on the Liberator's distinctive silhouette. Any sensitive equipment, like the Norden bomb sight, which would have been hastily destroyed by the crew if possible, but was sometimes captured, was removed for separate, detailed analysis. The aircraft was given a German designation, an alphanumeric code that classified it as a test aircraft, stripping it of its American identity. It was at this point that the aircraft, like many machines in war, likely earned a nickname. While official records are sparse, anecdotal accounts suggest names like the Blue Goose or other informal monikers were used by the German ground crews and pilots who now cared for it. A small human touch on a weapon that was now an object of intense professional scrutiny. The most daring phase of the operation was its ferry flight from the remote Balkan airstrip to the main Luftwaffe test and evaluation center at Rechlin. This was a mission fraught with peril. The KG-200 pilot assigned to fly it would have had to study whatever technical manuals could be found or translated, and rely on briefings from engineers who had inspected it. He would be flying a massive, unfamiliar aircraft, with cockpit layouts and procedures entirely different from anything he had trained on, deep into German airspace where every flak battery and fighter pilot was conditioned to see the B-24's silhouette as a target. The flight required careful coordination with Luftwaffe command and control to ensure it wasn't shot down by its own side. One can only imagine the tension in the cockpit, the strange feel of the controls, the alien hum of the American engines, and the constant, gnawing fear of a friendly fire incident. When the aircraft finally touched down at Rechlin, it was a significant event. It was not the only captured Allied plane there, but a fully operational B-24 was a crown jewel. Its arrival signaled the start of a formal, systematic deconstruction of its capabilities. It was no longer a bomber of war, it was now a specimen. The journey of the Blue Goose from a lost USAF asset to a prized German testbed encapsulates the strange, mirror world of technical intelligence during the war. It was a prize won not through combat prowess, but through a navigational error and efficient German logistics, a twist of fate that would provide the Luftwaffe with its most comprehensive look at the backbone of the American strategic bombing campaign. The initial, hands-on encounter between German engineers and the captured B-24 Liberator was a moment of profound professional cognitive dissonance. These were men schooled in a rigorous engineering tradition that prized precision, optimization, and elegance. They were the architects of the Junkers Ju-88, a masterwork of multi-role efficiency, and the Focke-Wulf FW-190, a fighter celebrated for its compact power and mechanical sophistication. As they approached the Liberator, clipboards in hand, their first impressions were likely a mixture of disdain for its crude aesthetics and a growing, unsettling respect for its brutalist functionality. This was not an aircraft built to win beauty contests. It was built to win a war of attrition, and its design language spoke this truth uncompromisingly. The walk-around inspection was the first stage of the shock. Up close, the B-24's construction betrayed a philosophy alien to German practices. Where German aircraft often exhibited finely finished skins with flush riveting and carefully contoured panels, the Liberator's surface was often rough. Rivet heads were prominent, panel gaps were visible. To an engineer trained in the German school, this suggested haste and a lack of refinement. It was easy, initially, to dismiss it as inferior craftsmanship. However, this initial dismissal soon gave way to a more nuanced understanding as they began to grasp the scale and intent of the design. The sheer size of the airframe was the first indicator. The high-mounted Davis wing, with its immense span, was not just a wing. It was a lifting body, a structural marvel designed for one primary purpose: to carry an immense load over an incredible distance. They would have noted its thickness and robust construction, a feature that contributed to its lift but also provided ample space for integral fuel tanks, a key to its strategic range. Moving inside the aircraft, the German engineers entered a world that was utterly foreign. The interior of a German bomber like the Heinkel He-111 or even the larger Junkers Ju-290 was a cramped, labyrinthine space, where every cubic centimeter was optimized for a specific function, often requiring crew to contort themselves to move between stations. The B-24's interior, by stark contrast, was cavernous. The bomb bay was a vast, unobstructed tunnel, engineered to accommodate a payload that dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe's inventory. The engineers would have immediately understood the strategic implication. This one aircraft could deliver the destructive power of an entire Kampfgeschwader, bomber wing, of German medium bombers on a single, deep penetration mission. This sense of scale was further emphasized by the crew accommodations and systems layout. The crawlway through the fuselage, while narrow, was a dedicated passage. The positions for the waist gunners, with their large, open windows, spoke of a design that expected and was prepared for sustained defensive combat. Everywhere they looked, they saw evidence of a different industrial mindset. The electrical systems, the hydraulic lines, the control cables, while not as neatly bundled as in a German aircraft, were accessible and, crucially, designed for easy maintenance and repair in field conditions. This was not a machine built for master mechanics in pristine hangars. It was built to be kept flying by sergeants and corporals on muddy, forward airfields under constant pressure. The philosophy was one of serviceability and redundancy over elegant perfection. The defensive armament presented another layer of astonishment. German bombers typically featured handheld machine guns in various positions, relying on the agility and skill of the crew. The B-24 was a flying gun platform. The power-operated turrets, the Sperry Ball turret protruding from its belly, the consolidated tail turret, the Martin upper turret, represented a level of defensive automation that was a generation ahead of standard Luftwaffe practice. Each turret was a self-contained fortress equipped with 2.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, a weapon renowned for its reliability and devastating hitting power. The engineers would have calculated the weight and complexity of these systems and understood the immense investment in resources and technology they represented. It was a clear statement that American doctrine accepted the weight and complexity penalty to provide its crews with a fighting chance against enemy interceptors from virtually any angle of attack. Perhaps the most humbling realization came from a detailed examination of the aircraft's construction techniques. The Germans were masters of complex, weight-saving designs that often involved intricate subassemblies. The B-24, they discovered, was designed for mass production. Its construction utilized extensive subassembly, where major components like wings, fuselage sections, and tail units were built in different factories by different teams, all to be joined together on a final assembly line. The evidence was in the airframe itself, the standardization of parts, the use of techniques that minimized hand-fitting, the entire philosophy of interchangeability. This was the true shock, the one that transcended aeronautical engineering and entered the realm of grand strategy. The German engineers, standing inside the cavernous fuselage of this single B-24, were not just looking at an aircraft. They were looking at the physical proof of a production system that could build this immensely complex machine not by the hundred, but by the thousand. The initial disdain for its rough-hewn appearance evaporated, replaced by a cold, sobering understanding. They were not examining a finely crafted dueling sword. They were examining the hardened steel blade of an industrial guillotine. The first impressions of the German engineers were, therefore, a journey from professional snobbery to stunned reverence for a form of engineering they had never truly embraced. The engineering of overwhelming quantity without sacrificing formidable quality. For a German test pilot, a man accustomed to the tactile feedback of a Messerschmitt or the responsive grace of a Focke-Wulf, strapping into the pilot's seat of the captured B-24 Liberator was an exercise in crossing into a different dimension of flight. This was not merely another aircraft. It was an alien cockpit, a symphony of unfamiliar sounds, sights, and sensations that demanded a complete recalibration of instinct. The very act of taking the controls was a journey into the mind of the American pilot, a hands-on dissection of the enemy's doctrine, and for the most perceptive among them, a humbling lesson in a different kind of aviation excellence. The first shock was the sheer scale of the cockpit environment. German aircraft design, driven by the need for weight savings and aerodynamic efficiency, often resulted in cramped, utilitarian cockpits where the pilot was an integral part of the machine, surrounded by a tight shell of instrumentation and controls. The B-24's cockpit, by contrast, felt industrial, even spacious. The pilot and co-pilot sat side by side in a wide flight deck, separated by a central console, a configuration that promoted crew coordination but felt initially vast and disconnected to a pilot used to a more solitary, enveloping workspace. The windows, particularly the expansive greenhouse-style nose, offered a commanding, almost unnerving field of view, a stark difference from the more restricted visibility of many German bombers. The pre-start checklist was a ritual of translation. The labels were in English, the units in feet, knots, and inches of mercury. The layout, while logical, was not intuitive to a pilot trained on German systems. The sheer number of switches and levers controlling systems like the turbo superchargers, the intricate flap and trim controls, and the engine management systems required careful study. Where a German design might have a single, elegantly integrated control for a complex function, the B-24 often had separate, dedicated levers, a philosophy of explicit, individual control over integrated automation. This spoke of a design priority. It was built to be mastered by a wide range of pilots, not just an elite few, and to be operated reliably under the immense stress of combat, even if that meant a more complex initial learning curve. The startup sequence was a symphony of a different kind of power. The low, guttural cough of the Pratt & Whitney R 1830 twin Wasp radial engines turning over, settling into a deep, rumbling idle, was a world away from the higher-pitched, metallic whine of German inverted V-12 engines like the Daimler-Benz DB605. The sound alone conveyed a sense of raw, unrefined torque. As the pilot advanced the throttles for takeoff, the sensation was one of immense, latent power rather than explosive acceleration. The B-24 was heavy, and it felt heavy. The controls on the ground, the nose wheel steering and brakes, required a firm, deliberate hand. This was not a nimble fighter. It was a freighter of destruction, and it demanded to be treated as such. The takeoff roll was a prolonged exercise in commitment. The aircraft gathered speed deliberately, its long Davis wing generating lift steadily, but without suddenness. The pilot had to hold the nose down longer than he was accustomed to, building speed before gently rotating. The liftoff was not a leap, but a determined, unstoppable ascent. Once airborne and the gear and flaps were retracted, the next phase of the evaluation began, the assessment of its flight characteristics in clean configuration. In the air, the Liberator's dual nature revealed itself. It was not a pilot's airplane, in the romantic, responsive sense. The ailerons were heavy, especially at higher speeds, requiring significant muscle to bank the massive wings. The aircraft responded to control inputs with a certain stately inertia. It did not dart or snap, but changed attitude with a ponderous, predictable authority. For a pilot used to the quick, almost nervous responsiveness of a German medium bomber, this initially felt sluggish, even primitive. However, as the flight progressed, a more nuanced appreciation would dawn. This very heaviness in the controls translated into exceptional stability. The B-24 was a magnificent platform for its primary mission, high-altitude, precision bombing. It tracked straight and level with minimal pilot input, a rock-steady gun platform that allowed the bombardier to do his work without fighting a twitchy airframe. It could weather turbulence that would batter a smaller, lighter aircraft, its immense weight and wing loading giving it a smooth, almost impervious ride. The evaluation of its performance envelope would have been a focus. The German pilot would have pushed the throttles forward, engaging the turbo superchargers, feeling the surge of power as the B-24 climbed efficiently to its operational altitude, often above 25,000 feet, a realm where many German interceptors struggled. He would have noted its high cruise speed, a direct result of the efficient Davis wing. realizing that catching a formation of these bombers required not just skill, but a significant performance advantage. He would have tested its single-engine performance, likely finding it surprisingly manageable due to its large rudder and engine outrigging, a critical feature for survivability. Landing the beast was the final, critical test. The approach had to be precise, with power managed carefully. The aircraft bled energy quickly with its flaps deployed, and its high wing required a slightly different sight picture on final approach. The touchdown was firm, the robust landing gear designed not for a feather-light kiss, but for the repeated, hard landings of operational service. Rolling out, the pilot would have been left with a profound and likely unsettling impression. The B-24 was not elegant. It was not nimble, and it did not cater to the pilot's ego. But it was supremely fit for its purpose. It was a strategic weapon system, engineered for endurance, payload, stability, and survival. To a German test pilot, it was a blunt, formidable, and terrifyingly effective tool. Flying it did not feel like mastering a racehorse. It felt like commanding a battleship into the sky. For the German evaluation teams at Rechlin, the captured B-24 Liberator was not merely a curious artifact. It was a dataset waiting to be decoded. The initial, qualitative impressions of its rugged construction and stable flight characteristics now had to be quantified into cold, hard numbers. This performance analysis, conducted through a series of meticulously planned test flights, was aimed at a single, critical objective: to understand the precise dimensions of the threat it represented and to identify exploitable weaknesses. What they documented, however, was a performance profile that fundamentally challenged the Luftwaffe's own doctrine of strategic bombing and revealed an enemy whose operational reach was of a different magnitude altogether. The first and most immediate shock was the Liberator's range. German engineers, calculating fuel capacity from the integral tanks in the Davis wing and the fuselage, would have arrived at a staggering figure. The B-24D, for instance, had a maximum ferry range of over 3,500 miles. Its operational radius with a full bomb load was consistently over 1,000 miles, and with external tanks, it could push even further. This single statistic had profound strategic implications. It meant that the B-24 could strike targets deep within the Reich from bases located in England, North Africa, or later, southern Italy, with a margin of safety that allowed for evasive routing. It could patrol the vast gaps in the Atlantic where German U-boats had previously operated with relative impunity. This range was not an accidental byproduct. It was the very raison d'etre of the Davis wing. Its high aspect ratio and efficient lift characteristics were a deliberate trade-off, sacrificing some low-speed maneuverability for the ability to project power across continents. For the Germans, whose own premier strategic bomber, the Heinkel He-177, was plagued by technical problems and possessed a combat radius of less than 1,000 miles. This was a sobering demonstration of a capability they simply could not match. Coupled with this phenomenal range was a bomb load that defied the conventions of the European air war. A fully loaded B-24 could carry 8,000 pounds of bombs on a long-range mission, and for shorter distances, this could be pushed to 12,000 pounds or more. To put this in perspective, the workhorse German medium bomber, the Heinkel He-111, typically carried a maximum of 4,400 pounds, and that over a much shorter distance. The Junkers Ju-290, a long-range maritime patrol and transport aircraft, could manage similar loads but was built in minuscule numbers. The B-24's vast, unobstructed bomb bay was engineered for this specific purpose. It could carry a mix of high-explosive, incendiary, and armor-piercing bombs, making it a versatile tool for destroying everything from industrial plants to U-boat pens. The German analysts, reviewing the payload specifications, would have understood that a single combat box of B-24s could deliver more high explosives to a target than an entire German bomber wing. This was quantitative superiority translated into qualitative destruction. Perhaps the most tactically unsettling performance characteristic was the B-24's speed. With a maximum speed often cited around 290 miles per hour and a typical cruising speed well over 200 miles per hour, the Liberator was fast for a heavy bomber. This was, again, a function of its efficient wing and the power of its turbo-supercharged Pratt and Whitney engines. This speed had a direct impact on the intercept calculus faced by the Luftwaffe's defense forces. German night fighters, like the Messerschmitt Bf-110, and even many-day fighters, found that closing on a formation of B-24s was not a simple matter of pointing their noses and accelerating. It required a performance advantage that not all German aircraft possessed, especially when the intercept had to be made from a ground alert status. The Liberator's speed, combined with its high operational altitude, often above 25,000 feet, where thin air sapped engine performance, created a challenging interception envelope. It meant that German fighters had less time to make their attacking passes, and flak gunners had to lead the fast-moving targets more precisely. The German evaluation would have extended to the aircraft's performance under duress. They tested its single-engine capabilities, finding that while it lost altitude, it remained controllable, a testament to its large control surfaces and powerful rudder. This was a critical survivability feature that many of their own multi-engine aircraft lacked. They would have analyzed its climb rate, noting that it was respectable for its size, but a potential vulnerability during the initial phases of the bomb run when it was most exposed. They studied its behavior in formation flying, appreciating its stability as a platform, but also noting the immense sky space a group of them occupied, making them a formidable, mutually defending target. The synthesis of this data, range, payload, and speed, painted a picture of a weapons system that was ruthlessly optimized for a specific form of warfare: the long-range, high-altitude, strategic bombardment. It was a platform designed not for tactical support or blitzkrieg, but for the systematic dismantling of an enemy's industrial and logistical backbone. The performance analysis forced the German engineers and strategists to confront an uncomfortable truth. The B-24 was not just another bomber. It was the embodiment of a grand strategy that Germany had never successfully implemented. It could go further, carry more, and fly faster than any equivalent aircraft in the Luftwaffe inventory. The individual numbers, the miles, the pounds, the miles per hour, were not just metrics on a page. They were the mathematical proof of a widening gulf in industrial and strategic capability, a gulf that the captured B-24, sitting silently on the Rechlin tarmac, represented with silent, overwhelming eloquence. Beyond the performance metrics and flight characteristics, the most enduring lesson the German engineers took from the B-24 was one of structural philosophy. To them, the Liberator was a living testament to a brutalist school of engineering, where resilience and serviceability were paramount, and where the aesthetics of precision were willingly sacrificed for the pragmatics of survival. This was not merely an aircraft. It was a piece of industrial armor, designed to absorb punishment and return home in a way that fundamentally challenged the German approach to aircraft manufacturing. Its construction spoke of a war fought not only with technology, but with the relentless, grinding power of industrial endurance. The airframe itself was the first and most obvious departure from German norms. Where German designers, constrained by material shortages and a focus on performance, utilized complex monocoque designs and lightweight alloys to save every possible kilogram, the B-24 was built with a robust, almost over-engineered skeleton. Its fuselage, with its distinctive rectangular cross-section, was a product of the Davis wing's high mounting, but this design was not without its structural advantages. It was an inherently strong shape, easier to build with straight longerons and formers, and it provided immense internal volume. The German engineers, examining the structure, would have noted the sheer gauge of the aluminum, the solidity of the frames, and the redundancy in its structural members. It was not designed to be light, it was designed to be tough. This was a machine that could withstand severe turbulence, heavy battle damage, and the repeated stresses of long-range, heavily laden flights in a way that more finely tuned German aircraft often could not. This philosophy of ruggedness was most evident in the landing gear. German aircraft often had elegant, narrow-track gear that retracted into complex, space-saving mechanisms. The B-24's main landing gear, by contrast, was a work of industrial sculpture. Its massive, trailing-link struts and large, robust wheels were designed not for a graceful touchdown on a pristine concrete runway, but for a controlled crash onto a rough, unpaved forward airstrip. The system was built to handle immense weights and punishing impacts, a direct reflection of its operational reality. The retraction mechanism, while complex, was engineered for strength and reliability above all else. To the German engineers, this was another data point in their growing understanding of Allied doctrine. Their equipment was designed for a global war, to be operated from primitive bases around the world, and to keep flying under conditions that would ground more delicate machinery. The defensive armament was another area where rugged construction was paramount. The power-operated turrets were not just technological marvels. They were miniature fortresses. The Sperry Ball turret, a self-contained pod of death that retracted into the belly, was a masterpiece of compact, hardened engineering. Its twin .50 caliber machine guns were mounted in a cast armor shell, designed to protect the gunner and the mechanisms from flak and fighter cannon fire. The Martin upper turret and the consolidated tail turret were similarly robust, with heavy-duty motors and gear trains designed to function reliably in the sub-zero temperatures of high altitude, even after taking hits. The .50 caliber Browning machine gun itself was a key part of this equation. The Germans were familiar with its awesome stopping power, but handling it in its aircraft mount revealed its simple, brutal reliability. It was a weapon that rarely jammed, was easy to maintain in the field, and could pour out a devastating volume of fire. The entire defensive system was a lesson in creating a resilient, 360-degree defensive envelope through sheer mechanical toughness. Perhaps the most profound revelation for the Germans lay in the manufacturing techniques evident in the airframe. The B-24 was not just built, it was produced. The evidence was in the details, the use of extensive subassembly, the standardization of parts, and the design choices that facilitated mass production. The prominent rivets and visible panel joints, initially dismissed as crude, were now understood as a deliberate trade-off. This method of construction was faster, required less skilled labor, and allowed for easier repair and part replacement in the field. A damaged skin panel could be quickly drilled out and replaced by a crew chief with basic tools. A complex, flush-riveted German skin required a master technician and a factory-level jig to repair. This approach extended to every system. The electrical wiring, while not as neatly loomed as in a German aircraft, was accessible and color-coded for easy troubleshooting. Hydraulic lines were routed for serviceability. The entire aircraft was designed with the maintainer in mind, acknowledging that the machine would spend its life being repaired and serviced by young, often exhausted, mechanics in challenging conditions. This was the antithesis of the German model, which often produced exquisite machines that were difficult to service and maintain outside of well-equipped depots. The ultimate conclusion the German engineers were forced to draw was one of chilling efficiency. The B-24's rugged construction was not a sign of a lack of sophistication. It was the pinnacle of a different kind of sophistication, the sophistication of scale and survivability. It was built to be flown, shot at, damaged, repaired, and flown again, thousands of times over, by tens of thousands of identical machines. Its toughness was a direct function of the strategic bombing campaign it was designed to wage, a prolonged, brutal war of attrition against the industrial and moral fabric of an enemy. In the Liberator's rugged frame, the Germans saw the physical manifestation of a simple, terrifying principle. It was not necessary to build the perfect aircraft. It was only necessary to build a very, very good one, and then to build so many of them, and make them so tough, that the enemy could never hope to shoot them all down. It was built not just to win battles, but to endure a war. The captured B-24 Liberator did not exist in a vacuum at Rechlin. It sat, a silent American interlocutor, amidst the Luftwaffe's own aerial arsenal, inviting inevitable and painful comparison. For the German engineers and strategists, this was not an academic exercise. It was a forensic audit of their entire approach to strategic air power. Placing the Liberator side by side with its German counterparts, primarily the Heinkel He-111, the Junkers Ju-88, and the troubled Heinkel He-177, revealed not just differences in design, but a chasm in strategic vision, industrial capability, and ultimately, in the very definition of a heavy bomber. The most immediate and stark contrast was with the workhorses of the Luftwaffe's bomber force, the He-111 and the Ju-88. These were fundamentally medium bombers, designed for tactical and operational level support of the Army in the Blitzkrieg Doctrine. The He-111, with its distinctive glassy nose, was already obsolescent by 1943, a slow and vulnerable aircraft whose origins lay in the pre-war era. The Ju-88 was a more capable and versatile machine, a testament to German engineering ingenuity, but it was still a medium bomber at its core. When compared to the B-24, the difference was one of class and scale. The Liberator could carry more than double the bomb load of a Ju-88 over a significantly greater distance. It flew higher and faster, making it a more difficult interception target. Its defensive firepower, concentrated in power-operated turrets, was vastly superior to the handheld machine guns of the German aircraft. The comparison was so lopsided it was almost unfair. It was a strategic heavyweight facing off against tactical middleweights. The more meaningful, and for the Germans, more tragic comparison was with the one aircraft that was intended to be their answer to the Allied heavy bombers, the Heinkel He-177 Griffin. The He-177 was a story of squandered potential, a design hamstrung by a fatal and idiotic technical requirement from the RLM, Reich Air Ministry, that it should be capable of dive bombing. This single demand forced a series of catastrophic compromises. To achieve the structural strength for dive bombing, the airframe became excessively heavy. To reduce drag and meet the performance criteria, Heinkel was forced to use a complex and unproven engine configuration, coupling two Daimler-Benz DB601 engines into a single power plant, the DB606, driving one propeller. These power systems were notoriously unreliable and prone to catastrophic engine fires, earning the aircraft the grim nickname Reichsfeuerzeug, Lighter of the Reich. When placed next to the B-24, the comparison was a study in opposing philosophies. The He-177 was a masterpiece of overcomplexity, a machine pushed to its theoretical limits to fulfill contradictory roles. The B-24 was a masterpiece of focused, pragmatic engineering. Where the He-177's engines were a maintenance nightmare, the B-24's four separate, reliable Pratt and Whitney twin Wasps were the embodiment of simplicity and serviceability. Where the He-177's dive bombing requirement compromised its entire design, the B-24 was singularly optimized for one mission: high-altitude, level-flight strategic bombardment. The result was that the troubled Greif, which entered service late and in tiny numbers, never remotely approached the operational impact of the Liberator. It was a qualitative solution that failed due to its own complexity, while the B-24, a quantitative solution, succeeded through robust reliability. This divergence reflected the industrial realities of their respective nations. German aircraft manufacturing, even in its most advanced forms, retained an element of craftsmanship. The Ju-88 was a superb aircraft, but its construction involved a significant degree of hand-fitting and complex subassemblies that limited its production rate. The He-177 was a technical nightmare to build and maintain. The B-24, by contrast, was designed for disassembly, not in the field, but on the production line. Its components were built in different factories across the United States and assembled with a focus on interchangeability and speed. The Ford Willow Run plant was the ultimate expression of this, applying automotive mass production techniques to a heavy bomber. The Germans were building precision instruments. The Americans were building industrial tools. The comparison also extended to crew philosophy. A German bomber like the He-111 or Ju-88 had a crew of 4 or 5, operating in a cramped, integrated environment. The B-24 had a crew of 10, each with a specialized station. This was not inefficiency. It was a recognition of the immense workload involved in navigating, bombing, and defending an aircraft on a 10-hour mission over hostile territory. It represented a different concept of operations, where the aircraft was not just a bomber, but a self-contained, long-duration combat system. For the German analysts at Rechlin, the comparative analysis yielded a devastating conclusion. They did not lack technical brilliance. The swept-wing jets and advanced rockets they were developing proved otherwise. What they lacked was the capacity for focused, large-scale production of a reliable strategic bomber. The B-24 exposed the fundamental flaw in the Luftwaffe's doctrine. It had been built for short, decisive campaigns, not a global war of attrition. The Ju-88 was the perfect bomber for the blitzkrieg against Poland and France. The B-24 was the perfect bomber for the systematic destruction of German industry. The comparison was not merely between aircraft. It was between a strategy that had triumphed in 1940 and one that was failing utterly by 1944. The Liberator, in its very existence, proved that the Luftwaffe had built the wrong air force for the war it was now fighting. The term emerged not from a press release or an official report, but from the grudging, professional respect of the men who knew aircraft best, the German test pilots and engineers. It was a phrase born in the hangars of Rechlin and the debriefing rooms, a piece of soldiers' slang that captured a complex truth with brutal efficiency. To call the B-24 Liberator a flying fortress on steroids was more than just a comparison to its more famous American cousin, the B-17. It was a reluctant, holistic admission that the Liberator was something both familiar and terrifyingly more, a quantitative and qualitative evolution that represented the next, unforgiving step in the brutal logic of aerial warfare. The comparison to the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was inevitable. The B-17 was the aircraft the German public and pilots knew best. It was the iconic formation bomber of the daylight raids, celebrated for its ability to absorb horrific damage and still return home. Its name, Flying Fortress, was a masterpiece of propaganda that also contained a kernel of truth. When the Germans first encountered the B-24 in significant numbers, it was easy to see it as a variant of the same theme. But as their hands-on experience grew, the distinctions became stark, and the "on steroids" moniker began to crystallize. It was an admission that the B-24 took the core concept of the fortress and amplified it to a new level of performance and menace. The first point of amplification was sheer size and capacity. While the B-17 was a robust and potent aircraft, the B-24 was simply bigger and more voluminous. Its Davis wing provided greater lift, its fuselage was more capacious. This translated directly into the two most critical metrics for a strategic bomber: range and payload. The B-24 could carry a heavier bomb load further than the B-17. For the Germans, this meant that the threat envelope expanded. Airfields that were once at the extreme edge of the B-17's operational radius were now well within comfortable reach for the Liberator. The steroids here referred to its extended reach and heavier punch, allowing it to strike targets previously considered safe and to deliver a greater weight of destruction on those already within range. The second, more subtle amplification was in its engineering philosophy. The B-17 was renowned for its rugged, almost mythic durability. It was a tough, traditional aircraft. The B-24, while just as rugged, represented a different kind of toughness, one born of mass production and strategic prioritization. Its construction, with its prominent rivets and functionalist aesthetic, was less about individual aircraft resilience and more about the resilience of the entire fleet. It was designed to be built in such staggering numbers and to be so easily repaired that losses became statistically manageable. This was the industrial steroid, the application of automotive-scale production to a heavy bomber. The B-17 was a finely crafted broadsword. The B-24 was a mass-produced, perfectly functional combat knife, and the Allied war machine could produce 10 of them for every one broadsword the Germans could forge. The Germans, masters of quality and precision, were facing an enemy whose quality was good enough and whose quantity was infinite. The admission was reluctant because it forced a confrontation with several uncomfortable truths. Firstly, it acknowledged that the Americans had not merely copied a successful formula, but had meaningfully improved upon it. The B-24 was not a derivative, it was an evolution. Its faster cruising speed, greater range, and heavier payload made it a more formidable and flexible strategic tool than the B-17. For the proud Luftwaffe, admitting that the enemy's second-string heavy bomber was, in many operational respects, superior to its more famous counterpart was a blow to morale and professional pride. Secondly, the term implicitly acknowledged the failure of the German heavy bomber program. The Heinkel He-177 was to have been Germany's answer to the Flying Fortress. Instead, it was a catastrophic failure, a flying lighter that never overcame its technical flaws. To speak of a flying fortress on steroids was to tacitly admit that the enemy not only had a flying fortress, but they had an enhanced version of it, while Germany had nothing that could even reliably compete. The comparison was not just between aircraft, but between the industrial and strategic systems that produced them. One system could produce a robust, effective bomber and then systematically improve its scale and reach. The other produced a brilliant but flawed concept that never left the prototype stage in any meaningful way. Finally, the phrase captured a sense of overwhelming, almost unnatural power. Steroids suggested an artificial enhancement, a brute force augmentation that went beyond natural progression. To the Germans, the entire American war effort must have felt this way. A nation supercharged by its distant, untouched industries, producing weapons on a scale that defied rational comprehension. The B-24 was the embodiment of this. It was the flying fortress concept, pumped up, enlarged, and set loose in seemingly endless numbers. This reluctant admission, therefore, was far more than a piece of pilot jargon. It was a concise, professional verdict on the state of the air war. It was an acknowledgement of American industrial and engineering superiority, a lament for Germany's own failed projects, and a sober recognition that the aircraft they were facing was not just another bomber, but the symbol of a new kind of warfare, one where quantitative advantage, intelligently applied, created a qualitative supremacy that courage and individual skill could not overcome. The flying fortress on steroids was not just a bigger bomber. It was the herald of inevitable defeat. The story of the captured B-24 Liberator does not conclude with its final test flight at Rechlin or its eventual fate, likely scrapped or destroyed in the war's chaotic finale. Its true legacy is far more profound and enduring, etched not in metal, but in the minds of the men who studied it. The aircraft served as a singular, tangible data point that fundamentally altered German perspectives, forcing a painful and comprehensive reassessment of their enemy, their own industrial strategy, and the very nature of modern warfare. The lessons learned from this one airframe rippled outward, influencing tactical doctrine, strategic planning, and post-war aviation philosophy in ways both immediate and long-lasting. For the Luftwaffe's fighter pilots, the hands-on analysis of the B-24 provided a tactical windfall. Flying the aircraft revealed its vulnerabilities with a clarity that gun camera footage and pilot reports could never match. Test pilots noted its heavy control forces, particularly the stiff ailerons that made rapid rolling maneuvers difficult. This translated directly into a tactical prescription: attack from the front, specifically from a slightly offset position to mitigate the threat of the nose-mounted guns, and force the formation to break. The head-on attack became the preferred method for German fighter units like the Sturmgruppen, heavily armored FW-190s designed to close in and shatter bomber formations with cannon fire. The evaluation confirmed that the B-24's defensive weak spot was the forward quadrant, a realization that saved countless German pilots and cost many Allied crews their lives. Furthermore, understanding its performance envelope, its high cruise speed and altitude, forced the accelerated development and deployment of higher performance interceptors and tactics to close the engagement window. For the engineers and industrial planners at the Reich Ministry of Armaments and War Production, the B-24 was a sobering case study in a production philosophy they had fatally neglected. Albert Speer, upon becoming armaments minister, had begun to push for standardization and rationalization, but the B-24 was the finished product of a nation that had mastered this from the outset. The aircraft was a physical manifesto for the principles of design for mass production. Its standardized parts, its subassembly construction, and its emphasis on serviceability over finesse were a revelation. The German engineers, who took pride in complex, optimized designs, were confronted with the devastating effectiveness of simple, robust, and interchangeable construction. The legacy of this insight was a belated and frantic effort to simplify German aircraft designs, such as the He-162 Volksjager, but it was too little, too late. The B-24 stood as a permanent testament to the fact that in a total war of attrition, the ability to produce good enough in overwhelming numbers would always triumph over the ability to produce perfect in limited quantities. On a strategic level, the captured Liberator delivered the most devastating blow of all. It was a microcosm of the arsenal of democracy, a single data point that allowed German intelligence to extrapolate the terrifying scale of American industrial power. By examining one B-24, they could begin to comprehend what it meant to produce over 18,000 of them. The aircraft was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of a boundless production capacity that Germany could not hope to match. This understanding filtered up to the highest levels of command, contributing to a growing sense of strategic despair. It made the concept of victory through attrition impossible. They could shoot down hundreds of bombers, as they did in the bloody raids of 1943 and 1944, but the stream of new aircraft seemed endless. The B-24 proved that the war was no longer a contest of martial skill alone, but a clash of economic systems, and in that arena, the Third Reich was hopelessly outclassed. Finally, the legacy of the captured B-24 extends into the post-war world, particularly in the formation of the new United States Air Force and the strategic doctrines of the Cold War. The men who would become the architects of the USAF's Strategic Air Command were keen students of the European Air War. The German evaluation of the B-24, obtained through intelligence channels and post-war debriefings, provided a unique red team analysis of their own primary strategic bomber. It validated the core principles that would define SAC: the necessity of long range, heavy payload, and high speed for penetrating deep into enemy territory. The lessons about defensive armament and formation flying, informed by German critiques, directly influenced the design and operational doctrine of the next generation of strategic bombers, like the B-36 Peacemaker and the B-52 Stratofortress. In the end, the captured B-24's greatest legacy was its role as a catalyst for a painful, forced enlightenment. It changed the German perspective from one of dismissive arrogance to one of grudging respect and, ultimately, to a clear-eyed recognition of their own strategic predicament. It taught them how to fight the bomber more effectively, but in doing so, it also revealed the futility of the fight. The aircraft was a mirror, and the reflection it showed the Third Reich was one of a flawed, resource-starved war machine facing an opponent whose strength was not just in its technology, but in its awesome and relentless capacity for production. The legacy of the Liberator was the legacy of industrial warfare realized, a lesson written in aluminum and steel that would echo through the decades of conflict that followed.